Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today's guest is a buddy of mine. His name's Damon Wright. People say he's the coolest lawyer ever, so we can be the judge of that in this episode. He's actually the head of Gordon and Rees's advertising and e-commerce practice. So, I've known him for a couple years. He's, really, really well respected in the online advertising and e-commerce world, as his title gave away. He works with some really big clients in our online advertising and e-commerce world. Just a really, really smart guy. He's helped us a handful of times and helped us, what I believe, save us a lot of legal headache and money. We talk about a few different interesting subjects. One of which is some of the most common mistakes that e-commerce store owners are making. Whether you're an existing e-com store owner or you're thinking about getting into the e-com world, he goes into 5 of the biggest mistakes from a legal liability standpoint e-commerce store owners are making. And we also talk about his involvement in a nonprofit in Alabama and how he got somebody off death row, and that led into a conversation about systemic racism and how he believes that's still, extremely prevalent in 2020. And, I asked him some questions. I feel like, again, I always learn something new in these conversations. I feel like he taught me a couple things because of his legal background and his many years in the as being a lawyer. I believe 20 plus now. I feel like he had some perspective about our legal system that was systemically racist that was kind of news to me. So I felt like I was enlightened a bit based on his expertise. So a really good combo. We talked about COVID lockdowns as well, because that's one of my favorite things to talk about. But I know you'll enjoy the episode. And again, if you like what you're hearing, share with your friends, rate 5 stars, write a review if you're feeling extra nice. And enjoy the show.
This is Openly Outspoken with Jeremy Adams, where differing opinions are not only accepted, they're encouraged.
So Damon, we are live, and you were just commenting on, for people that are watching on video, I have a Backstreet Boys shirt kind of like on the wall behind me. And for those that know me, know I'm a big Backstreet Boys fan. I actually saw them in Vegas last year. And for the record, it was majority women, but there were a lot of guys jamming out at the concert as well. So it made me feel better that I wasn't the only guy in the USA, that unless the girlfriends just like forced them to be there, but they were looking like they were having a good time.
That's awesome. Yeah, it reminds me back in college, my fraternity, I made pledges, one pledge class dressed up like each of the members of New Kids on the Block.
Okay.
And on demand, they had to immediately go into dance and dance routines and singing. And these were guys who were like kind of deadheads. It wasn't really their style, but it ultimately, I think, worked out to their benefit. There were some girls who were impressed by their performances. So silently, quietly, they actually thanked me for having hazed them like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about women. Like, I don't have any musical talent. I know you do, but women don't have, or women love guys with music ability. There's something about it. I don't know, but I know New Kids are a little before my time. I know they were like the boy band. They were big in like the 80s, right? They're about a decade before.
Yeah, like 1989, 1990 was their heyday.
Okay.
Yeah.
They actually toured, and this isn't a podcast about the Backstreet Boys, but they toured with the Backstreet Boys for a while. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I think about a year they toured. But anyway,
Yep.
Glad you could join the show today. Excited just in general. I know we know each other a little bit. We've done a little bit of business together, which is cool. But I get to learn a little bit more about you today too. So depending on the guest I have, some I know very well, some I barely know at all. You're probably somewhere in the middle. So I would love to just share a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to become a lawyer. Because lawyers are people too. When people hear the word lawyer, they get kind of squeamish, myself included. What made you want to get into the business and industry of law?
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up the son of a lawyer, and he went down a different path with his legal career than I've gone. But growing up, if I overslept for class, and my dad needed to take me to school, I spent a couple times in first and second period not in school, but in Henrico County General District Court, because it was more important that he be on time for court than me be on time for school. So there were some times when I was sitting in the back of the gallery watching him try cases. This was General District Court. He had cases all over, but it might just be a collections case. But that kind of got me interested in things. And like a lot of kids growing up, I wanted to be a professional athlete. There's no chance of that happening, but I could see how the competition involved with being someone's advocate and the adrenaline rush that provides, that was kind of appealing. And of course, also being able to stick up and be someone's defender. Kind of always had a soft spot for the underdog. And so that kind of mentality of what can I do where I'm someone's champion, their defender, was appealing. And when I was 16, I sued a mechanic for replacing my alternator when it didn't need to be replaced, and then overcharging me for the replacement I didn't need. And went to the law library and drew up the complaint and went to court and tried the case. One of my friends was a witness to my conversation with the mechanic about how I asked him just for an estimate, not to do the work. And that was kind of fun. And then after graduation from high school, Beach Week in Myrtle Beach, I had a friend of a friend who got arrested for leaving the scene of an accident, and probably was the unauthorized practice of law. But I stepped away from the cases of Milwaukee's best to interview some witnesses and prepare her for her statements in front of the judge, and she was acquitted. And that was all in a matter of a few days, because they have a special court during Myrtle Beach Week for high school kids, college kids. And so those were things that were fun for me. And I remember when I was in college, I was signed up for all these accounting and computer science classes. And not to say you can't do that and be a lawyer, but it was kind of like the goal to success was to go work for an accounting firm or consulting firm and make a decent starting salary. This is back in the early 90s. And I was thinking about, is this really what I want to do? What's the most fun thing I've ever done? And it was, like a second pitcher of beer at a bar called JM's. And it was the first or second week of school. And I realized the most fun thing I've ever done was the things I just described. What am I doing as a business major? I need to go to law school. And immediately transferred out of those classes to these other classes. I ended up as a political science major. Again, I could have been a business major and still gone to law school and maybe even be a better lawyer. But that was the evolution of my thought. And so it stems from those sort of childhood experiences, those teenage experiences.
That's great. And I know you're heavy, and that's why we work together. You're heavy into the online advertising space, which is a booming market right now. It's a great niche for you to be in. So great job with that decision. I just feel like there's so many of us that are so dumb and doing so many stupid things that there's a lot of business opportunity for you. That's why I had Vinny Fisher on my podcast a handful of episodes ago, and I'm like, there's so many smart people in the internet marketing world that are running their business so poorly from anything that doesn't have to do with revenue. I feel like if it has to do with revenue, they're great. Yeah. Outside of that, they make so many mistakes, like myself included, right? And that's with Unicorn. This is, I've had multiple ventures over my 20s, and again, we're far from perfect, but we're by far as structured as we've ever been. We have, full-time HR manager. We have, our finances are really in check. We have you that helps us with legal matters. We have a couple more attorneys that we're very, very structured and really wanting to do things the right way based off of years of bad decisions and expensive mistakes based on silly decisions. So when did you start getting into the online advertising world and the marketing world? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was at a law firm called Venable for about 23 years. And so I started at that firm in 1996, 97. And Venable always had a strong presence with the whole As Seen on TV community. Direct response, infomercial, some major players there. And I was, an associate, kind of jack of all trades, business litigation, some white collar criminal defense work, and started working over the years more with the companies that were selling the late night As Seen on TV products. And so that exposed me more to advertising law and FTC issues, and it was fun. Over the course of doing that, I started to represent some e-commerce retailers, and it was really around like 2011 or so. I represented a company out in San Diego that are great friends today, and I realized as I was a litigator for so many years, and I still am, but what was fun is not just being a litigator. Not Damon's our litigator, he goes to court for us, but Damon's our lawyer. And from getting really close and understanding their business issues in the industry, I was able to say, okay, we've gotten this lawsuit, we're going after someone, or someone's suing us, or it's a regulator, and here's what we can do to improve our compliance. Here's what we can do to improve our contracts, our website terms, or protect our intellectual property, our trade secrets, our trademarks, our copyrights. And they educated me. I asked dumb questions, and they really took the time because they knew I cared about them and I was going to work hard. And of course, across Venable, there were people who were subject matter experts, but they really took the time to give me a very good education. So split testing and LTV and CTR and traffic and media buying, I started to learn all about those things. And then they recommended me to some of their friends. And then those friends recommended me to some others. And then I started going to more than just the As Seen on TV, the Electronic Retailer Association conferences that I'd gone to somewhat, that were, Telebrands and TriStar and Idea Village.
Yeah, Kevin founded that. My old partner, Kevin Harrington, was a founder of the Electronic Retailer Association, or one of the founders, right?
Yeah. And so was a Venable partner, Jeff Knowles.
Yeah, awesome.
Yep. So I started, I'd been to those things, but then I started going to Affiliate Summit, Traffic and Conversion, Ad Tech. And it really kind of snowballed from there. And so, today, as you know, most of my clients are e-commerce retailers, and it's still litigation. I do that full on, but a lot of it is also counseling, compliance, looking around the corner, seeing what's coming, staying very abreast of what the FTC is looking at, what state attorneys general are looking at, and of course, getting the benefit of representing dozens and dozens of e-commerce retailers and learning from all those experiences so I can take that industry knowledge and help the next client. So it's kind of really like being embedded. It's not that we talk to the lawyers after we've come up with this VSL and we're getting ready to hit play, but it's going through the script and in a creative way, as well as with a legal mind, figuring out what the most artful way is to say something to still have high conversion but minimize the risk. So it's been a fun evolution, and I'm really grateful for some clients 7, 8, 9 years ago who helped bring me in.
Yeah. Would you say this is the space you're most passionate about at this point? Like, obviously you're in it, but is it like something that this industry is what you're most passionate about as well?
Yeah, so I'm the head of the advertising and e-commerce practice group here at my law firm, Gordon Rees, and I think, we've got about 1,000 lawyers.
Yeah.
And I came over from Venable to start this group. And so, this is what I kind of eat, sleep, and breathe. And it's, again, not just the law, but it's the business issues. It's, knowing, one of the things I guess I should say is, as a litigator, business litigation, there came a point after doing that for like 12 years or so where it started to become too routine. I'd see another breach of contract case or another trade secret case, and every case is different, every client's different, but what's fun about this is you have to constantly keep learning. If Amazon or Facebook or Google or TikTok, if they do something, it might as well be Congress, because it can be tremendously disruptive to the businesses and to the whole industry. So that the need to continually learn sort of keeps you young. Every day is going to bring some new adventure, I like that. I'm ADHD. I have to constantly kind of get that new stimulus to keep me engaged, and I have that. If I was a wills and trust lawyer, I would be miserable. If I was a tax lawyer, I wouldn't have much fun. It's just a little too dry. Maybe analytically it would be fun, but yeah, just the creative part of it, the color, the personalities, all that is what makes me really excited most days to come to work.
Yeah, for sure. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we covered that, because I have something really exciting I want to bring up that I'm looking forward to the answer, but I think my listeners will really appreciate it as well. There's obviously the e-commerce world is booming, right? Everybody knows that retail is just dying more and more year after year. There always will be a space, I think, for traditional retail. I don't think it's ever going to go away completely, but it's definitely losing a lot of market share. And especially with COVID, it just even killed retail, is giving it an even quicker death, I believe.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people in this space currently. There's a lot of people I know that are wanting to get in this space. There's a lot of private money. I know there's a big buyer's market now. Like, that's why we're most excited, because we're building, a store and planning to launch another one that we're confident we can have a really nice, healthy exit. So we're super pumped about that. There's a lot of interest and intrigue in the online marketing and e-commerce world. What are some, and I'd like to cover as many as you're willing to cover, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people in the e-com store owner making, or e-com store world making? Like, what are some of the biggest mistakes that are costing them a bunch of money, or opening them up to the the most liability? Like, what are you seeing that's putting these stores at risk most commonly in 2020?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of a common thing across probably all businesses is, but I'll get to some other things more specific, but a common thing is just making sure you've got a good operating agreement with your business partners. Because when people start making money, people's recollection of what the deal was can often change. And you want to have that nailed down from the get-go. So if you've got a buddy and you decided to launch a business together, having an operating agreement that describes how you're going to value the member's interest down the road, what happens if someone withdraws from membership. It's too easy to say, all right, this person's my bud, we don't need to talk to a lawyer, or we'll just go to LegalZoom, pull something down, because we love each other. And
we're never going to have issues.
Never going to have issues. Yeah. This is my boy. Well, the way to keep that relationship intact is to have some clarity, to have things in writing, to have it sketched out, so that, it's just human nature. We can't help it. People have a tendency to look at things from their own perspective, and it doesn't mean they're being greedy or selfish, but when you take that and you've got two people who both maybe are driven, you can have a clash. So I would say from the start, and again, this is true with any business, whether it's a restaurant or some professional services firm or whatever, you want to have a good operating agreement that spells this out. But more specifically to e-commerce retailers, one thing that is incredible that is missing from so many websites is strong website terms of sale or terms of use. It is an opportunity to really protect yourself from liability. It doesn't really hurt conversion, because it's very rare that people actually read those. And if you have in those terms mandatory arbitration and a class action waiver provision, and you have a place on your checkout page where the consumer checks that they agree, which again shouldn't hurt conversion, because the consumer's already filling in their first name, last name, credit card number, maybe their address. It happens really automatically. If you have that checkbox and they agree, you're going to have almost eliminated the risk of facing a consumer class action. There are professional plaintiffs who are trolling the internet at all hours to try to find some website selling a product and to find some claim that maybe is aggressive, maybe it's deceptive. And then they buy that product, but they don't care about buying the product. The reason they're doing it is so they can then claim that they were defrauded, they were deceived, and they're suing on behalf of themselves and everyone else. And they're going to seek all your profits as far back as the statute of limitations goes. even if the case has no merit, it's going to cost lots and lots of money to defend. And they're not just professional plaintiffs, but they're, of course, consumer class action lawyers that are doing that all the time, too. And, for fun, I often just click on ads, go through the funnel, see what's being sold, and then I look at the terms. And it's shocking to me that there are so many businesses out there. Some have in-house counsel, and they're well-established even brands, and they often don't have this type of language. It's something a good lawyer can prepare in hour, 2 hours. I mean, we've got sort of standard templates that we customize for our clients that are selling products to consumers or selling services. And then the other thing that really is can lead to just the total devastation of your business. And I don't like to focus on the negative and sort of sound like doom and gloom, but for companies selling products on subscription, and that can be the trial offer Nutra business, or it could be DirecTV or Netflix, or all variety of things in between, your newspaper, right? For companies selling things on subscription, there's a federal law called the Restore Online Shoppers Confidence Act, ROSCA. And then there are some state laws that are kind of analogous to that. California has one. Those laws require that you have certain disclosures on your checkout page, that you disclose the billing terms, that you disclose the cancellation terms, and they also require that the consumer affirmatively agree to those terms. And then you also have to have a simple and easy mechanism for the consumer to cancel their subscription. That's become a hotbed of activity by consumer class action lawyers again, and also by state attorneys general, district attorneys, and the Federal Trade Commission. And the consequence of even just a technical violation can be just horrific. The FTC goes in, and before you even know a lawsuit's been filed, often they've got an ex parte, so that means you didn't know about it, Latin meaning kind of without you knowing about it. They go into court and they get an asset freeze against the company and against the company's bank accounts, against the owners' bank accounts. They get a receiver appointed to take over the company, and then they seek disgorgement of profits. And that's happened a lot in the last few years with the trial offer Nutra community, skin cream, muscle diet, selling a product on a trial basis that then converts to a subscription. But the FTC is looking more broadly at other businesses too. There's a company called NutraClick that's banned from negative option marketing now. The owners are banned, and they really didn't do anything egregious at all. A well-run company, but the problem that they had was that in their terms, it talked about how you needed to cancel 24 hours before the next product shipped to not be charged. Let me rephrase that. They didn't disclose that you needed to cancel 24 hours before the product was shipped. And so someone would contact them on Tuesday and say, I want to cancel my subscription. And the company would say, okay, well, it's Tuesday. We already are scheduled to ship tomorrow, so we're still going to charge you for this, but we'll cancel you for the next payment, and you won't be charged the next payment. The FTC said, you violated ROSCA. You should have made clear in your terms that they needed to cancel 24 hours before. And so I'm not trying to get in the weeds here. Maybe that was too confusing, but it's really important for these types of businesses selling on a subscription billing model to have the right language on the checkout page.
Yeah, and I wrote down, and I'm assuming, by the way, myself included years ago, you've represented some pretty large businesses that didn't even have an operating agreement, right? I'm assuming that's the case.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yep. And it ends up to really messy divorces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have an operating agreement, great terms of service, terms of sale, which you actually helped us with, which is great. I think on multiple occasions for different things. And then let's talk about the trial business a little bit too, because I didn't even really know about the trial business, which is crazy, till like a couple years ago, and we have some mutual connects in that world. Like, what, for those that don't know, and I'll explain it the best I can, Damon, and if you want to add anything, the trial business is mostly, not all the times, there are some great legitimate trial businesses out there, but a lot of the trial stuff is pretty shady, and they get people on rebill without them being aware of it, or with as minimal notice as possible. They make it really difficult to cancel. A lot of trial advertisers, this kind of whole world, they make false claims about what the product can do, whether it's and everybody that's listening probably has seen this at least once themselves, even if they've never purchased some sort of skincare offer that's backed by Oprah, that's really not backed by Oprah, or a diet pill that'll make you lose 100 pounds in a month, or something that'll make your dick 2 feet long, or whatever it is. Like that's a big portion of the trial space, and it's very misleading. It's kind of like the I don't even know how to explain it without sounding really, really mean, because I know some of the people in that space. And what do you think the future of that side of the trial business is? I know in particular there's a lot of government agencies really cracking down on that, because the online marketing world has been kind of the Wild West, right, for many years, and now that it's growing, it's getting more eyeballs. Where do you see the future of the trial business going?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, MasterCard changed its terms with respect to a particular type of merchant, and then a year ago, Visa did the same thing. So it's harder to get payment processing for those types of businesses than it used to be. And I think because of that, there's, I think, less trial offer, nutraceutical health and beauty type offers out there. Some people are doing work offshore, internationally, looking at other markets. And then some folks have evolved to selling just a straight sale, a single product, or still subscription, but not a trial. So, you've got maybe your checkout page says you can buy this product right now for this price, or we think you're going to love it so much that you can subscribe and save, and on subscription pay less over time. I think there are also companies that are doing trial the right way.
Yeah.
And that's with affiliates and the commissions that have to be paid to attract the affiliates, so they get a return on their investment. Sometimes that might not be attractive, and obviously there's a benefit to using affiliate advertising, performance marketers, because you don't have to pay out until they've made you money. But I do have some clients that are doing trial the right way, and they're having success. And it has been around for a long time in a legitimate way. I mean, if you read Apple News and you are clicking, past your 5 articles per month of Washington Post or New York Times, then they ask you if you want to pay for it. You're getting a sample of the product for free.
Yeah.
And then you're allowed to decide if you want to subscribe. If you go to the ice cream shop, you can taste different flavors of ice cream before you decide to buy. If you want to look at a car, you can test drive the car before you decide to buy. So I hope it stays, but I think it's really important that it just be done the right way. And doing it the right way is pretty easy from a compliance perspective. The question is it going to work for your business model from a business perspective? I think it can, because I have clients that are doing it. And it's, as a lawyer, for me, it's fun. I don't know if fun's the right word. It's rewarding to see clients who were maybe reckless and immature mature, grow up, become more responsible, to realize they've got employees who are counting on them, they've got a family that's counting on them, and they want to get their act together. And I've had a lot of clients or folks who called me, I've talked to them and said, okay, here's what I recommend you do. And they've said, great, thanks a lot. We'll let you know if we need you. And didn't hear from them again for a year. And unfortunately, that call a year later was, hey, Damon, we just got the civil investigative demand from the FTC. Can you help us? And, that's frustrating. I wish they'd listened and I'd been retained earlier. I could probably make more money sometimes by representing them when it's a total shitstorm, but that's not what I want to do. I want what's best for them. So, the whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure was true 250 years ago, and it still is.
Yeah. And for those that don't know what we're talking about, it's a kind of a hidden part of the marketing world that's rather large. And like you're alluding to, it is shrinking now, but it's still pretty large. Where people, their whole business model is unfortunately just to lie and deceive and just mislead people into different types of subscriptions and products that, will make you look 20 years younger, but it's really just like a bottle of, cream or whatever, like nothing special about it. I mean, there's just a lot of shady stuff. And fortunately, like younger buyers like myself, I think do a much better job of research and kind of like have our guards up for those types of products. But a lot of the target demo for that type of thing is the senior citizen community and people that just aren't really savvy internet buyers. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because that is a big part of this this world that I personally am not the proudest of, and I'm not a big government getting involved guy, but I'm
Right.
kind of happy to see that the FTC is addressing this sort of thing because it's going to ultimately just benefit people that are doing things the right way, and it's going to protect the consumer. So but I have so.
I was going to tell you, the big area now as well, of course, with COVID, all the CBD essential oils, vitamin E, D, C, you name it, those are dietary supplements. And where people are now getting in trouble is because they've crossed the line into making claims about disease and making drug claims. And so we're starting to see a lot more of that kind of enforcement activity by the FTC and the FDA. And it hasn't been a high priority over the years. It has been a priority, but now it's becoming an area where the FTC is becoming much more aggressive. And the copy that people thought they could write back in March and April, they're starting to realize they can't even touch it. To say, vitamin C can help boost your immune system, that's probably okay, right? But then to say, and there's never been a more critical time to protect your family than right now during this pandemic, buy our vitamin C product, that can lead to enforcement action as well. So, and it seems like it should be just free speech, but it's because it's in the context of an ad, it's not. It's regulated as commercial speech. So, anyway.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I have back to the either people just getting into the space or existing, in the online marketing or e-commerce world, basic or most common mistakes you're seeing and basic precautions they can take. So having a solid operating agreement, which I 1,000% agree based on experience, and I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you that's a good one.
Yep.
Having solid terms of service. And then the third one you recommended was just having your language in check and make sure you're good for anything that has a subscription component to it, right?
That's right.
Anything else that you're saying or that you would recommend for new or seasoned entrepreneurs in the online marketing world or e-commerce world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to make sure you're working with a manufacturer who's reputable and to have a good quality control agreement and make sure that what you're buying is what you think you're buying, to have certificates of analysis done of the product ingredients and the composition. Any other business partner, it could be your customer support call center company, of course, advertising agencies and affiliate networks, your fulfillment company, payment processors. There are lots of other service providers in the ecosystem, and with all those contracts, you might not have a lot of leverage starting off, but you should definitely at least read the contract and see what leverage you have and shift the liability where you can. I think that's overlooked. Too many people think, oh, contract. I don't even want to read it. It's not what I went to school for, or what I've been passionate about, and I'm just going to sign it. And that's a huge mistake. If a manufacturer produces a really bad batch of some nutraceutical for you, you want to be indemnified for that. And you want a representation and warranty that's their responsibility to make sure the product meets the specs. If customer support is dropping calls and people are on hold for 3 hours, that's a problem. So you want to be protected from those types of things in these agreements. That's, of course, what we do as well. I went to a mastermind in San Diego this weekend. It was a fun and we're just enriching event. Got to talk to some really good folks, but during a breakout, I started talking to a couple that was there that sell supplements, and usually I'm at these things, and I've got clients that say nice things about me, and that kind of validates and they vouch for me. But I just kind of broke off a little bit and just walked up to a couple of people that I saw there, and I said, "Hi, I'm Damon," and they said, "Hi, you're the lawyer," and I said, "Yeah, I am," and we laughed, and I said, "So you sell supplements?" And they said, "Yep, but we're not the manufacturer, so we don't think we need to talk to a lawyer. We don't really need legal help." And I just knew at that point I was wasting my time even having this conversation. There was so much they were ignorant about. I said, the manufacturer probably has some liability if they produce a defective product, but your advertising is still something that could expose you to liability, and there's some other things you should think about. And they said they wanted my card, but I don't think they really got it. And I didn't want to, I'm not trying to sell. I was actually offering to give them free advice because we were spending the next 2 days together. But there's, I would say read. This sounds crazy, but it's beneficial to know what's happening out there, and you should subscribe to the FTC press alerts and learn what's going on in the industry. And that's because you probably, let's say there's a line of what's compliant and what's not compliant, and that sometimes overlaps with what's aggressive and not aggressive. As an e-commerce retailer, you probably want to go as close to that line as you can. And you might even at times decide you want to cross that line because it's worth the risk. But that whole analysis, that risk assessment, you have to start with knowing where that line is.
Yeah. And
too many people don't have any idea about that. And that's what I try to help educate clients about. And so, a lot of the advice we give, we give it, it's collaborative, but it's also trying to educate the client in a sense so they don't have to necessarily keep coming back to us. They've learned some things.
Yeah.
That's a long rambling answer to your question.
No. I like that though. And again, and this is coming from us. Like, we've had challenges with manufacturers. Of course, we've had challenges with fulfillment centers. We were just dealing with a little bit of a challenge the last few weeks. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe we should have sent you that contract to review.
Okay.
I don't know. So that's a good one too. Anything else that you're saying for, I'm sure there's a million things, but just kind of like most common?
Definitely spend some time doing a trademark search before you decide you're going to call your product this or that. And you don't want to get sued for trademark infringement. If you want to build a brand, go ahead and apply for trademark registration. And likewise for your website copy. If you've split tested it, optimized it, or you've got really high performing landing pages or ads, apply for copyright registration for those things. So with that, you're going to be able to protect your turf on Amazon. You're going to be able to get infringers. That could be competitors. That could be counterfeiters on the other side of the world. You'll be able to take action against them. You can get damages. If it's copyright infringement, you can get disgorgement of their profits. You can get up to $150,000 in statutory damages and your attorney's fees. So you're going to, first, by doing that search, protect yourself from getting sued. And then if you go to the next step and get registrations, you're going to kind of have your arsenal to fend off those people who might be trying to steal from you. But then the other reason is if you are looking to exit, to have that trademark registration, to have those copyright registrations for the PE firms, that's going to impress them that you're buttoned down, that this is goodwill that you've protected. It's also helpful if there is some imposter out there to be able to tell the Better Business Bureau, that's a company that's not us. They're using our name without our authorization. We're taking action against them. This is our brand. We have the registration. And so, just to add to the list, protecting trademarks, copyrights, making sure you don't infringe.
Okay. No, I like that. And that's 5 great ones. And if somebody wants more, they can just pay your retainer and
that's right.
work with you at this point. No, but that's super helpful. And again, I know a lot of people are getting into the space or new to the space, or even, again, people that are doing a solid amount of revenue, again, ourselves included, over the last few years, where we're continuing to learn and grow and get more buttoned up, because we're adding it, and it's the responsible thing to do, right? We're adding team members. We want to just have as much stability as possible. We want to build and exit these brands, right? So it's I appreciate what you're saying more than ever, because to run a legitimate business and hopefully exit, which should be almost everybody's goal, that at some point that's starting a business, having these things ironed out are crucial. So I wanted to take a little bit of a hard shift here. And we've actually talked about this before, and I know this is 2020 and everything that's going on with lockdowns, and I know this isn't necessarily your area of expertise, but from somebody that's dedicated their whole life to law, and I'm assuming you have a pretty good understanding of our Constitution. What are your thoughts on like the lockdowns and everything going on? Like, obviously there's certain states that are still relatively strict, California being one. There's rumors that once Biden's in office, lockdowns could come back. Like, I don't know if that's true or not, but he's definitely talked about nationwide mask mandates, which I don't know if that's constitutional, but I've seen he would work with governors and mayors and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what's your view on lockdowns from a legal standpoint? Because I've always, this is a long-winded question, then I'll shut up and let you answer. I see the government saying, hey, these law-abiding citizens that are, giving haircuts, that have a team to pay, that have kids to put food on the table for, like, how the heck is the government telling them they can't open their doors and stay in business? And haircuts are just one example. Obviously, hundreds of thousands of businesses suffered through this. Millions of people lost their jobs. Millions of people's revenue did worse or suffered because of it, even if they did stay in business. So what's your view on, government mandated lockdowns and the whole essential, non-essential business thing?
Yeah. So I'm not qualified to sort of speak to whether it's good policy or not. I don't know if we looked at other countries and what they're doing. If we'd had a total, complete lockdown in April, would we be able to reopen up our businesses like we're not doing right now? And I know there are other countries to look at as a model. I think I don't view any of this stuff as something that should ever have been a political issue. It frustrates me that people think, okay, you're wearing a mask, so you must be liberal. You're not wearing a mask, you must be a Trump supporter. I think it's a matter of science. I don't think on the other side of the earth, countries are just deciding their policy because they're trying to hurt Trump. We're kind of sometimes have this isolationist view of the world, but it's just happening all over the world. And I think from a policy perspective, looking at what countries are back open now and what they did, and doing that would seem to make sense to me. But from a constitutional perspective, I get that it's horrible for people to not be able to feed their families and do their jobs. And I think we had I think it was actually maybe like a few months ago on a Zoom call with some folks. I was saying as an analogy, that if we were at war with Russia and Russia had bombers flying through the air, and there was a national mandate that after 7 o'clock at night, you have to turn all of your lights off in your home. And the idea was to make it harder for the bombers to know where you live, where to drop the bombs, that you have to have all your lights off. That would upset some people. They'd say, I want to watch television. I want to work out in the light. I want to have a meal with my family so I can and see what food I'm eating. People would be pissed off about that. But it's for the greater good is the idea. And I think ultimately people would understand that, because the consequence of keeping your lights on could be that your neighbor's house is demolished or yours is demolished. Maybe if you think of it in the same way, people would say, okay, this is about protecting our neighbors and those around us, and it's going to mean we're going to have to sacrifice, just like our great-grandfathers and grandfathers sacrificed, and grandmothers, and but there is a time when people have to sacrifice, and it's suffering, and it's maddening, it's frustrating. But if it's for the greater good, then maybe we can be okay with it. But from a constitutional perspective, if you think about all the constitutional rights that have already been taken away or that have been narrowed, this is not necessarily, to me, the worst or the most offensive. I think that drugs should be legal.
I agree.
The government says that it's illegal. Obviously we're seeing a national change with marijuana, but for years, the government's saying it's illegal to smoke this plant. It's not hurting anyone. Why can't you put something in your mouth, chew it, smoke it, snort it, inject it? The government says you need to get permission from the local government to renovate your kitchen or your bathroom, or to put a deck on the back of your house. Well, how is that hurting anyone? I mean, you can have a home inspection come in before you sell your house and say this deck's going to collapse. But you have to go through a whole bureaucracy of red tape and permitting to do that to your own home. I mean, these are things that have been around for a long time. Prostitution. If there's a consenting adult and another consenting adult, and they want to do this and they want to exchange money for it, why is that illegal? Those things are been around forever. I guess we've just adjusted because they've been around forever. But saying that the whole issue with respect to masks, or even saying don't open up your business and have people come into your establishment because it's necessary. I don't like it, but I can see where it might be good policy depending on what other countries are doing, what's working. And it doesn't seem to me to be the most offensive government intrusion in our lives compared to what we've been putting up with for so long.
Yeah, and though I guess so, the Russian bombing analogy, I do see the comparisons there, I guess. And again, I'm rather libertarian. I do lean conservative on many things, but I do lean left on many things like drug laws. And I agree. I think drugs and prostitution should be 100% legal. I don't agree with it. Republicans claim to be like the party of small government, but they're I'm pro-choice as well. They're it's bigger government to say, hey, you can't get an abortion, you can't smoke marijuana, and you can't participate in prostitution. That, by definition, is bigger government because it's more regulation. So Republicans are smaller government maybe on like certain business regulations and taxation, which I agree with, but they're not on those like personal things, which I don't agree with at all, right? But what I would say, and again, I'm in no way, shape, or form like a science denier. I guess like the frustrating thing that I see is the more and more data that comes out, COVID really just isn't nearly as deadly as what we thought initially. It's a little bit more deadly than the flu. We know exactly who it's hurting. So now that we have all this data, and then it's like, okay, if you're not wearing a mask, if you're not like, there's just so much conflicting data. I mean, there's the CDC saying you should wear a mask, and that, but then there's tons of, like, literally thousands and thousands of doctors worldwide have said, hey, herd immunity would be the best path. There's thousands of doctors that say, let's have the old people stay in, and let's let young people get a cold, or maybe not anything. A lot of young people are asymptomatic. And then once there's a level of herd immunity. So that's where I guess it gets tricky too, is now there's so much conflicting data. It's not like when we first locked down, there was the WHO that said it was like a 3% fatality rate. Where it's like, okay, 3 out of every 100 people that are getting this thing, like maybe at that point, I mean, there is some point where even people like me, like that are like as far anti-lockdown as possible, if it was 3 out of every 100 people, I'd be like, okay, maybe we should consider something. Like that would be, that would be 10 million people in this country dead, if everybody got it, right? But
yeah, what's Australia doing?
well, Australia, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I'm gonna look it up right now. They were very, very strict lockdown, but I believe like they were like one of the most strict. Let me see where they're at. I know so many countries in Europe are having spikes now because they were strict lockdowns, and so yeah, Australia only added 8 cases. Yesterday, and this we're recording this on November 11th of 2020. So they seem to be doing good. I don't know what their existing policy is for businesses and stuff like that. I know New Zealand and Australia and a couple countries like that are like the South Korea or like the model goals, and I know some countries in Europe were, but now they're getting huge spikes. And if you look at deaths per million, even, and people shit on Trump, and again, I'm not like a big Trump advocate here, not saying he couldn't have done better. I think he could have taken it more seriously in certain ways, but like if you look at deaths per million, we're right in line with a lot of major European countries: Spain, Italy, France, the UK. So yeah, again, I was just curious, like, again, we can agree or disagree on policy, but from a constitutional standpoint, like, can the government just be coming in and just telling us to, like, are we free? Like, do Americans even have freedom at that point? Like, where the government can just tell us we have to shut down our retail store or our indoor dining because of a virus that's slightly more deadly than the flu,
Right. Well, I mean, back to Australia for a second, if we had that kind of lockdown, maybe we would be reopened now. Or if we had, starting tomorrow, a complete and total lockdown for 14 days, maybe by December we could open everything up again. But I'm not the health scientist, or if you haven't done the analysis, and you've spent a lot more time studying than me. But those are the things that occur to me from a policy perspective, from a sort of government regulation perspective. A lot of the cases in court have to do with treating businesses differently without a rational basis for the distinction, and that and those kinds of cases make sense. If you're going to say that the worldwide wrestling, whatever, WWE can hold events, but this music venue cannot. This restaurant can, but this bar can't. Those kinds of distinctions that don't have a rational basis, are often where people end up prevailing in court.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I think you and me were talking about that earlier this year. Is like WWE was given permission by the Florida Governor DeSantis to stay in business and keep putting on shows, but it's just like, since I'm not a wrestling business, I can't stay open. I mean, it's just like, where do you draw the line on essential and non-essential? And by the way, like, so what Australia did, you could argue is a better path, but like, is every time there's like a virus, we're just going to expect the government to pay our bills for 6 months until there's some sort of, you know what I mean? Like that's big government saying, shut everything down. And because we don't want a bunch of, primarily old and already sick people or who's dying off COVID, healthy people aren't dying off COVID. We want to prevent as many of these deaths as possible. We want government funded, federal pay and just all these things. It's just like, that's a slippery slope too. It's just like that's big government. But then there's the food workers, which are, typically not high wage earners, the people delivering your groceries, and like they have to stay working. They don't get the government help. But if you're of this line in the sand, if you're on this side, you get government funding. It's really, really, really tricky. And then the people that are doing these low wage jobs, like the food delivery and stuff like that, they're probably having the worst diet because they're lowest income. So they're not eating the healthiest foods. They may not have the best access to healthcare. And all those things. So yeah, it's a very, very slippery slope. And yeah, we can agree or disagree on policy. It sounds like we may have some slight disagreements, and that's okay. I just was curious from from a law standpoint. Like, again, I
Yeah.
would have just been like, looking back at it, knowing what we know now, I think in March, if we just said, let's draw a line in the sand, if you're 70 and up, 60 and up, whatever it is, we're going to come up with some program. We're going to deliver you food for, would have been a fraction of the government spending. We wouldn't have had to shut down the country, and everybody that's under a certain age or whatever, live life like normal. And, there's very few hospitalizations with young people. I mean, we would be past this virus already. And then we wouldn't have to worry about, like, what's happening in most of Europe right now, which they had lockdowns. And then, now that everything's opening back up, they have gigantic spikes. So it's like, what was even the purpose of the lockdowns?
Yeah.
So, I mean, but we'll see. I mean, the good news is the day after Biden was the president-elect, there's apparently a vaccine now. So that's interesting timing.
I got a letter today from the client I've told you about that I represent, who was previously on death row in Alabama.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up, by the way. That was actually the next thing. Can you share about that? You got somebody off of death row on a pro bono case in Alabama. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I was going to tell you. So there's COVID throughout the prison, and they are. It's you can't think of a worse place to be without COVID, but especially with it. And he sent me every year. He sends me a menu of items that we can buy as like a holiday gift package of all, like beef jerky and all kinds of food. So I'm going to be sending that to him soon, but they can't leave their cell. And it's just obviously just a breeding ground. So back in 2002, the American Bar Association, they're always trying to find lawyers to represent folks. And there's not enough public interest pro bono lawyers out there, especially not in states like Alabama. So started representing a great guy. His name is Freddie Woods, and he was convicted of murder back in 1997. The state's evidence was that he shot a guy who was a liquor store owner in a robbery. So that was the state's evidence. He was convicted. It was a 2-day trial. There was some evidence that was concealed. There was testimony that was false. Defense attorneys back then, by statute, if you're court appointed, you could get up to $1,000 in fees for all of your out-of-court time, which would maybe be enough money in 1920. $1,000. So it was 50 hours, $20 an hour. And so you can't be too upset with them, but there's a lot of things they didn't do. Investigation, meeting with their client, meeting with witnesses, hiring experts, working with experts. So it was a 2-day trial. A couple jurors gave false responses during jury selection. And so anyway, I got the case in 2002 and with some other colleagues for several years, just investigated everything, turned over every stone, drove all over Alabama or St. Clair County, knocked on doors, talked to jurors, talked to witnesses, discovered there was another suspect that the state actually had arrested and interrogated, and he said he was going to commit the murder that was committed. Long story short, I've already made it a long story, but we at my firm, 2002 was a long time ago, so it started off with like 4 or 5 lawyers, and I was in the team, and then one by one, people left to go in-house, to raise their families, whatever, and for the last 10 years or so, it was really me trying to recruit more people. And we've put a lot of resources into this. We had a 2-week evidentiary hearing back in 2017. It was amazing that we were able to even get a 2-week evidentiary hearing because we were in Alabama State Court, and the judges in Alabama are all elected, which kind of destroys the separation of powers. The idea, is that judges aren't elected officials, and that way they can be a check on the legislative branch, the executive branch that are elected. The judge's loyalty is to the law, not to which way the political wind's blowing and what can I say to get myself reelected. But in Alabama, they're all elected. So it's a real temptation for a judge to follow the line of tough on crime, do the time, pro-death penalty. But we ended up with a judge who had only recently taken the bench, and has some integrity. And so we had a 2-week evidentiary hearing with uncovering the evidence about this other suspect. The state said they could never find the guy. And they knew he was a suspect, but they weren't able to find him, and they determined that he wasn't involved because he was in Texas on a construction job when the murder happened and over the days that followed the murder. That was totally false. They found him. They actually arrested him. He was actually in their jail for quite a while. They ended up prosecuting him for some other charges. And it was actually the same prosecutor that prosecuted my client around the same time. But they had this whole fake alibi for this guy. The DNA evidence they had was flawed. And there was an interrogation of our client. 2 jail guards came forward and described how that was an abusive, coercive interrogation. Our client was 19 at the time. And the judge ultimately vacated the conviction and vacated the death sentence. He could have gone down a lot of different grounds, but he doesn't need to sort of rely on all of them. The easiest path to do this was that the 2 jurors gave false responses during jury selection. One didn't disclose that he was a friend of the victim for many years. During jury selection, that was one of the questions to the jury. Does anyone know the victim here? People raised their hand. People said yes. This guy didn't. Years later, I knocked on his door, sat down, talked with him, and didn't sort of immediately ask him that most important question. But in the course of conversation, he revealed that, oh yeah, I knew him real well. Another juror had been the victim of an armed robbery, sexual assault, when she was working as a convenience store cashier, and the perpetrator was a black teenager, and she was still fearful to be in the presence of black men. And one of the questions during jury selection was, has anyone ever been the victim of a crime? People raised their hand. People approached the bench. They shared their story. She didn't raise her hand. She probably was still feeling so traumatized by that she didn't want to share it with anyone. But the judge found, because of that, and the defense attorneys saying they would have struck those jurors had they told the truth, the judge found a new trial was required. And so then we had the choice after this: do we have another trial, or do we take a deal? And it was a really, really tough decision to make. But our client ended up pleading no contest to a lesser charge, and now he's eligible for parole. And his first parole hearing was earlier this year. The evidence before the parole board was literally like, if this wasn't prison but it was a college, that he would have been voted, school president, most likely to succeed. We had declarations from jail guards and from volunteers in the prison from an organization called Kairos Prison Ministry. He spoke at the annual Christmas service where family members come into the prison. Great record, but the first time up, the parole board pretty much never grants parole. And this was his first time up because before he was serving a death sentence.
Yeah.
But so they postponed the next hearing for 3 years. They could have postponed it to 5. And I'm optimistic that he'll be out, and I think he'd love to be a guest on your show someday.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the share, and congrats on that. That's really cool. I watched that movie Just Mercy recently, and that was based in Alabama, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel that in 2020, because I know a lot of that was based off of, biased judges in the South, and just like, do you feel like that's still the case in Alabama in 2020? Like there's like a level of racism going on, or prejudice based on upbringing or color of skin, or whatever the case?
Yeah. I think it's all over the country. But yeah, it is. And Brian Stevenson, the founder of Equal Justice Initiative, is a modern day saint. He actually, I know you know about my band. He made a video introducing our band for this virtual concert that's coming up. He's amazing. But yeah, there is systemic racism, and it comes through in, just as I described, $1,000 as the max fees for court-appointed counsel. I mean, we have a right to counsel under the Constitution, a right to a fair trial. There's racism, and there's also a tremendous challenge with just people who are poor.
Yeah, well,
two levels of justice.
Well, yeah, I'd like for you to define what systemic racism means to you, because from what you're telling me, that's more of an attack on people that are low income, not an attack on people based on the color of their skin. I know disproportionately that can be minorities, but that doesn't sound racist to me as much as it's just an attack on the lowest income of society.
Yeah, fair enough. So systemic racism would be there's Supreme Court case law that prohibits striking of jurors based on their race. So before a trial starts, the prosecutor gets to strike some jurors, and the defense attorney gets to strike some jurors. So you start off with a larger number of potential jurors, and each side gets to make strikes. And it might be because of how they answered a question during jury selection, or it could be something that because someone works in mental health, and the prosecutor thinks they might be more sympathetic to someone where there's going to be a defense of mental illness, whatever. But they can't have as the basis for their decision the color of someone's skin. Well, so often in these, and this happens all around the country, but the prosecutor will strike the juror because they live in the same community as the defendant, which means that all the black jurors, if it's a black defendant, are often struck. And why do they live in the same community as the defendant? Because in this county, 95% of the black folks live on one end of the county. So time and time again, the black defendant's facing a trial where all the black jurors have been struck. The Supreme Court says if it's based on race, it's unconstitutional. But the prosecutor's getting there from a different direction because this person happens to live 2 miles away from that person on the same long stretch of country road. And by the way, I'm talking about counties where, a lot of people know a lot of people because it's not urban, metropolitan. I think that when we talked before about this, I sent you a series that was done by a Florida newspaper comparing sentences of defendants where they compared apples to apples to apples, same criminal record approximately, and same offense. The only thing different was the race of the defendant. And it's time and time again, the black defendant received a sentence that was at least 1.5 times longer or harsher than the white defendant. And it comes from just the makeup of who's on the bench too, Jeremy. There is this subconscious bias.
Which I would, by the way, I do agree with the subconscious bias because you're going to relate to somebody that is most like you. And that's the case with religions, color of skin. But I guess it's like a common term, and I'm just like, maybe I'm focusing too much on the term systemic racism because that's like the buzzword of 2020 to like for woke people. But like, what I guess, like, why isn't it called just like a subconscious bias of like the juror then, or like the jury or the judge, which I actually agree with, and there's a lot of data that supports that. And if most judges are white, they're going to maybe side with, a young white man that like, hey, this guy kind of reminds me of me. I did some dumb things when I was young, rather than a young black man. So I actually completely agree with that. But why isn't that specifically the terminology rather than just like paintbrushing everything as like systemic racism? Because that doesn't, to me, systemic racism is implying that the system is racist, and having a judge or a jury that has subconscious bias isn't necessarily because of a racist system. It's just because of they happen to be white and they're going to have a subconscious bias because of it, which I do agree. But I think it's not doing the problem justice. It's just like I have the same.
But it's both. It's both.
Okay.
I mean, it's also structural. I mean, I think you really enjoy reading Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson because it goes in more depth, of course, than a movie does. But it's both. I mean, the structure is a structure that allows prosecutors to strike all the black jurors. The structure is elected judges, right? If you've got a community that has individually a lot of racists, and there's a judge who isn't appointed by a committee or vetted by the the legislature and vetted by the governor, but is elected by that local community, and you have that white victim, and you have a black defendant, and it's unfortunately a racist community, that elected judge, that's structural.
Yeah.
So there's off the top of my head, I can't give better examples of it, but it is structural. It's based on what the prosecutors are able to do, given the structure, what the judges are able to do, given the structure, and yeah, there's an overlay of poverty too. But it's not just individual, subconscious. It's structural.
Yeah, and are you referring to just Alabama? Or are you referring to?
No. Yeah, no, I'm not trying to beat up on Alabama here. No, I think it's our country. I mean, we've got a great Constitution, and we've got we'll see how things play out in the Supreme Court, but in local courts there are Supreme Court decisions that uphold the Constitution, protect our freedoms, and if this case stands for protecting this person's constitutional rights, that applies to all of us, right? So there are decisions out there that are very, very powerful and important. But in this particular court, whether it's in New Jersey, Washington State, Oklahoma, Alabama, those decisions actually aren't applied by the judges making those decisions day in, day out. It's like, if you remember the Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill, and you picture that bill dancing on the steps. That case, that written opinion, it's like it didn't make its way down Interstate 95 to be presented and decided and addressed and applied by this judge. And that happens too much. And I mean, you could look, there was a guy in Alabama who was executed earlier this year. He wasn't the shooter. He was tried again, like 2 days, court-appointed attorney, elected prosecutor, of course, elected judge. And the guy who was the shooter said, I committed this murder. This guy was there, but he had no idea I was going to commit this murder. What happened was 2 police officers chased a guy in a house. They were in the process, apparently, of beating him. Another guy in the house woke up, heard the disturbance, and came out and killed the 2 police officers. The guy who was being beaten has now been executed. And there was a national outcry. The Pope wrote the governor of Alabama asking for clemency. Celebrities did. There was evidence that the 2 police officers were taking bribes, and the reason they were chasing this guy inside the house was because he said, I'm not going to pay you off anymore. And it was a crack house. And this guy did some bad things. He was a drug dealer, but he didn't deserve to get beaten by the police. And they didn't deserve to get shot, but he also didn't deserve to get executed by the state. And because it all happens slowly, there was a trial, and then there was an appeal, and then there was another appeal, and there was this judge signing off and that judge signing off, and then there was a petition, and then it went to the governor. It's all looks like it's sort of formal and fair and professional, and but it's not. To me, it's as horrific as George Floyd, if not more horrific, because that was in the heat of the moment, passion, emotion. This was methodical, and I think it was murder. It was murder because the prosecutors convinced a jury that he lured the police inside the house so they could be killed, even when the guy who committed the murder said, not in a million years, no, this was all on me. Execute me. This guy had nothing to do with it. Yeah.
Now that's.
So I'm getting too fired up now, but that kind of stuff, that shouldn't happen in any civilized country. We talk about other countries and beheadings in Saudi Arabia, North Korea, China, but there's some things that have happened in our country that, in today, that are pretty sickening.
Yeah. And I agree with that completely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you sharing, because obviously you're very well versed in the legal structure compared to myself and compared to most people. I think one thing that I think that, and again, this is kind of a sensitive topic to discuss, but something that I think should be discussed, is one thing I think we have to get better at as a country is addressing all the things you're talking about. So anything that is structured, putting systems in place. So if there is the subconscious bias, which most people can agree with, even if it has nothing to do with skin color, even if it's of class, of religion, there's always going to be some level of subconscious bias. Putting things in place to at least balance it out. I don't think we can ever get rid of it completely, right? But I don't think we're ever going to get rid of prejudice completely. We could stop judging people by the color of their skin tomorrow, and then we're going to find something else to judge people based off of. But at least if we can have things in place to balance that out and just realize that people are human, and whether it's purposely or, subconsciously, they're going to side with certain things. But I think we need to get better at job as a country of just not making everything about race. Like if it's a white cop killing a black guy, we don't know. Like we need to give that some time and see if it's race motivated. Like not everything is race motivated either. And if we want to grow as a nation and come together, we can at least start giving people the benefit of the doubt in some way, shape, or form. And I know that may not be easy, and I know that may not be popular, but not everything is always race motivated. Like it's most likely, especially nowadays, like I feel like it's just the cops are not trained properly and they're having a bad day and they're super stressed and they have poor mental health. Like I would bet that's more likely the case than racism in 2020. Not saying that racist cops don't exist. Of course, there's still, I think there's always going to be a level of racism. Unfortunately, I think we've come a long way, but I think it's always going to exist at some level. There's going to be people that don't like Jews. There's going to be people that don't like poor people, like rich people, like fat people, like skinny people. We're just going to judge, and because humans judge. But I think we need to just do a better job of saying, hey, there could be racial motivations in this case, but let's do some research and find out this guy's history, because I think that's a big step for us. And if we want to stop making everything about race, we have to stop making everything about race,
Yeah, I agree. The whole slogan of defund the police, I think, was really unproductive. The folks who shouted that then say, well, we don't necessarily mean defund the police. We're really talking about reforming the police. Well, then it was a really misleading slogan. I think
it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We don't mean what our whole campaign's called.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to like, what's the purpose of the police? And I think it's to protect people. It's not to, it shouldn't be to intimidate people and make sure that they respect your authority and submit to your authority. Those are two different things. There's a music festival called Bonnaroo, and the security at Bonnaroo are the nicest, most protective folks you'll ever see at any kind of security. It's like the difference between going to a bar where the bouncers are menacing and look like they just want to pick a fight, to going to a place where they're welcoming you and saying, here, come on in, and can we get you some water? Now, police can't always take that approach, of course, but it is a different mindset, a totally different mindset. And if you go back to what the purpose of the police are, to protect us, and we get back to that kind of mindset of protecting, as opposed to I'm in charge and you need to respect everything I say do, or else I'm going to jack you up, that I think we'll make a lot of progress.
Yeah, and again, just playing the other side, I think empathy, and that's probably why Joe Biden, as of now, is the president, is he, like Trump does a very bad job of showing empathy and maybe even having empathy, like who knows, right? But that's probably why Joe won, is just because he seems like the more nice guy, and whether he's more qualified, whether he has better policy, I mean, I don't think that was a big factor in this election. But just from the empathetic standpoint, I do think we have to continue to look, like cops do have really hard jobs. Like it's not something I'd want to do. A lot of people say shit to them, give them a hard time. Like I think we should continue to look at mental health and do everything we can to increase training and not defund, but if anything, maybe increase some funding for different mental health programs, and maybe be a little more strict on like how long they can be working shifts and, you know, things like that, so they're not drained. But also, like, hey, as a society, know our rights, know how the system works, and if you get pulled over by a cop or treated unfairly, just do your best to be calm and abide, and know that you'll be able to hopefully win in court if you have a good case. You know, obviously, if there's, and again, I'm not a big believer. The data shows that, and I've said this on multiple times on my shows, like if the Democratic Party really cared about Black lives, all they'd be talking about is drug decriminalization, because the data doesn't support that cops are out there just killing that many people, and specifically shooting, you know, unarmed Black people and stuff like that. There's only a handful of those cases every year. But with that being said, I think both sides have to continue to improve, and there has to be some accountability on the on whoever's getting arrested, or whoever's getting, you know, just because a cop's being mean, you know, we still have to have a level of like respect that the cops, for the most part, again, there obviously are major exceptions, but for the most part, they're just doing their job, and, you know, let the legal system, that I believe for the most part, if a cop truly does do something bad in 2020, and I think that, you know, justice can be served. Again, there's exceptions, and the news takes hold of those, and but for the most part, I do believe that. I don't know if you agree, but that's just my opinion too. We can't just blame everything on the cops and say cops need this, cops need that. Some people want to defund, but not take any accountability as citizens as well, and say, hey, maybe we should just be a little bit more understanding that their jobs are tough, and they are stressed out, and people are treating them like shit all day. Like, let me just be a little bit nicer. And right. Again, I know, I'll say one last thing. I know that is a slight ignorant comment because I don't have Black skin. So I don't know what it's like to deal with police, you know, being a Black person or an Hispanic person. But, you know, I do believe that, you know, both sides can improve.
Yeah, no, I agree. So often things are set up as like some binary choice, you know, and you're either, you know, in support of the environment or you're in support of the economy. Well, maybe you can be both. Yeah. And to say that, I can say there are lots of great police officers and they've got really tough jobs, and we should respect that. And I can also say there are some really bad police officers who abuse their authority. Correct. And they should be held accountable. There's a lot, you know, they're both true.
And I agree. And I think if that was more of the discussion, and again, I agree, Defund the Police is like the worst name of all time for any type of movement. Conservatives, for the most part, you know, more like libertarian type conservatives like myself, like, we can agree on cops not having too much power, because conservatives are all about no one should have that much power. You know, like even racist people, even like the most racist conservative would probably be like, yeah, I don't want that cop having too much power. Like, even racists would probably agree that, hey, if a cop's overstepping boundaries and abusing power, we should, you know, have something in place to punish that, because most conservatives don't like anybody with that much power. You know, that's why they stick to their guns, and the Second Amendment is so important. Like, I don't want anybody having too much power over me. And if they do, I'm keeping my guns in my house ready to go. Like, conservatives are anti anybody having a lot of power. So I think and it seems to be heading that direction. It's just kind of quietly heading that direction. But I think the country could have really come together. And that was an opportunity for Trump, by the way, that I don't think he took advantage of. I think most people can agree that any cop abusing their power should be punished. Conservatives and Democrats, like, you know, you have a gun, you have a badge, and if you're going to use that power to take advantage of treat people like shit and get benefit for yourself, then you should absolutely be punished to the full extent. So but so so what were you about to say?
No, one of these days let's talk about the ACLU. I worked for them in college, and that's it's interesting because it's made up of liberals, but it's all about civil liberties. Although they have become more political over the years, but we can say that for a conversation for another time.
What is the ACLU?
The Americans with Civil Liberties Union.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and so they historic case is defending the right of the KKK to march through the city, because that's protected First Amendment speech. But also bringing litigation to prevent the school system from requiring that kids say the Lord's Prayer at the beginning of every homeroom in school, again, because of freedom of religion. So they're historically probably lean very Democrat and considered to be very liberal, but very much in favor of defending the Constitution and protecting civil liberties.
Yeah, I think now that you talk about it, I may have not been familiar with the name, but that does sound familiar, just protecting that free speech. And again, I agree, by the way, that's where I don't agree with a lot of conservative rhetoric, is it's forcing religion down people's throat is not freedom of religion.
Right.
It's hey, you can do what you can worship whatever God you want. I'm going to worship whatever God I want. And we're both going to respect the other person's views, or non-God. Hey, my God is the ground, or whatever I want my God to be. So, but yeah, man, I appreciate you diving into some of this stuff, because, I think you're passionate about it. I'm kind of passionate and somewhat ignorant, I'll admit. So I feel like I've learned a few things, and I'm glad I could get your legal perspective. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, Damon, if they're a online advertiser or e-commerce client or e-commerce store owner, what would be the best way to contact you?
Yeah, my email. And the law firm is Gordon Rees. We've got a practice group page about our practice group, and of course my bio is on there. There's something, this guide is, I think, a great resource for folks, and it's the e-commerce retailer legal guide. I think happy to send this to anyone. Just spending 30 minutes reading it, it's only 40 pages long, could save, it sounds like a BizOp claim or something like that, but could literally save you millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it's free, and it's not a trial offer. So, but yeah, contact me by email. That's dwight@grsm.com, or
dwight@grsm.com, and we'll have contact info in the show notes as well. But I just wanted you to say it out loud in case somebody was mobile or whatever the case. So, cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and enjoyed the wide variety of topics we discussed, from
definitely. Thank you,
e-commerce to systemic racism. So,
yep. All right.
Thanks,
Talk
man.
to you.
All right.
Take care.